Okay, great. So welcome again to this session called Intersectional Struggles for for Justice in Food Systems. Food sovereignty for all people cannot be achieved unless structural inequalities in food systems are identified and redressed. In a context of increased right-wing and human rights degradation globally, bodies and identities differing the normative order are under attack. Women farmers have historically struggled for their rights within our movements and also to be integrated in policies. However, it is about time to go further. We must add the voices, the bodies, the lives of and the gender of gender and sexual diverse food producers also to that. We must add the voice of the ones with diverse disabilities, the voice of the ones coming from racialized communities, and so many others suffering from structural discriminations. All these groups suffer discriminations. They are marginalized. They have their rights violated. Sometimes, even within the movement, where patriarchal and sexist patterns are reproduced. During this session today, we want to discuss about how we manage to overcome all this. We have with us 4 great leaders from 4 different continents. Their lived experiences as farmers and as activists who experience in their own bodies multiple and intersecting forms of discriminations will give us elements to strengthen our common struggle from an intersectional perspective. We need revolutionary love in our actions for systemic transformations towards a world in which we all can be free. I welcome you once again. My name is Paula Gioia. I'm a small-scale food producer, originally from Brazil, living for the last 20 years in Germany. I am a member of ABL in Germany, which is the member organization of La Via Campesina, and I've been pushing forward an agenda of integrating the struggle of gender and sexual diverse people in the food sovereignty movement for the last 7 years. It's my pleasure to introduce you our speakers. I just want to share my screen with you. So we have with us today, as I said, 4 great speakers, great leaders, and I would like to welcome Souad to present herself. Please make sure that you have your interpretation available. We'll have, I think, 3 or 4 different languages during the session. So make sure you select in the globe the language you want to hear. So Souad, please introduce yourself. Trying to highlight some key elements, intersectional elements of your. Yeah, please go ahead.
Ok, merci Paula. Je m'appelle Souad Mahmoud, je viens de la Tunisie. Je suis une femme féministe.
Anna, I am a lady. I am from the left, and I am an agronomist, and I am a farmer. I am a member of the Women's Democratic Association in Tunisia. In our association, we struggle for equality, dignity, and for the respect of the differences, whether it's gender or other differentiations. I am a unionist as well within the Work Tunisian organization, UGTT. And given that the 2 organizations I am member of are part of the Women's World March, and I was part of the World Global Women's March.
Thank you, Souad.
Merci.
Now I'd like to invite Dee to present herself.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am a Black, mixed heritage, Caribbean, Afro-descendant, Indigenous and European, queer, older woman with seen and unseen disabilities. I am a land elder, urban grower, food and farming actionist, and the food justice coordinator and a director of the Land Workers Alliance.
Thanks very much, Dee. Now we go with Nikar, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nikar, Yen-ling Tsai. I'm a cisgender, queer rice farmer and university teacher from Taiwan. I belong to the privileged Han Chinese settler ethnic group who have been colonizing Taiwan over the indigenous Austronesian people since the 17th century. I'm a member of the Land-Dyke Feminist Farm, a non-binary, gender-friendly, community-supported agricultural farm in Taiwan.
Thanks a lot, Nikar. And finally, Kelvin. Kelvin, I think your mic is muted.
Hello, good morning to all of you. My name is Kelvin Nicolas. I'm from Brazil, from the movement of the landless workers. This is a country movement, has been on for 40 years now. I'm 21, gay, Black, and I also part of the collective LGBTQ plus
Thanks a lot to the four of you presenting yourself and already showing to our audience today a little bit of the intersectional aspects that we are going to be highlighting today. This session will be divided in 3 blocks. During the first block, we want to set a bit the scene and try to talk a little bit about what intersectionality means. During the second block, we are going to try to tackle the dialectic relation between the private and the public in our lives and in our political work. And then finally, we are going to talk about the transformational power of organizing our struggles from an intersectional perspective. During the whole session, you can write questions in the chat box. There are some people supporting us. And during the first hour of the session, we will be here in crowdcasting. And then after 1 hour, we are going to move to the Zoom room, where it will be a more interaction part of the session. So so in order to start, I would like to try to understand with you what intersectionality means. And for that, I'd like to ask Dee, if you could please break down to the audience the concept of intersectionality and how does it connect to your lived experience?
Thank you, Paula. So intersectionality comes from Black feminist work, and in particular, the Black feminist African-American lawyer, Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the phrase. And it is a tool for practice and for analyzing the intersections of race and gender with the complexity of power. So a lot of people think that intersectionality is about identity or identity politics. And it isn't really just about identities. It is about how those identities intersect and how they relate to power, and how those multiple and intersecting oppressors impact on people's lives. And one of the things that Kimberly Crenshaw has said, that if you are not including race in your analysis, then it is not intersectionality. So that is a very brief explanation of what intersectionality is. So it is about your multiple and intersecting identities, and how that relates to power in the forms of multiple and intersecting oppressions. So in terms of how that has sort of impacted me, I'm a Black woman, I'm queer, though my queerness hasn't really impacted my life, because I only came out publicly last year. But being a Black woman who grew up in the Caribbean, being an older woman, being a person with disabilities, I experienced various forms of oppressions, racism, violence, structural violence in forms of policies that impact my life. So as a disabled woman living in England, I've been impacted by, for instance, the austerity that happens within the welfare system here in the UK.
Thanks a lot, Dee, for this great start explaining us, what does it mean and how you have been experienced that. Now I'd like to invite Kelvin to speak to us. Kelvin comes from Brazil. Brazil. I'm also from Brazil, and we are just celebrating that we managed to kick out this fascist government, that was in place until the 31st of December. Kelvin, could you please put your camera on so we can start our conversation here? Yeah, hello. So yeah, congratulations to the people in Brazil who managed to kick out Bolsonaro. But I would like to hear from you, how this fascist context, in Brazil over the past 4 years, and for sure, which is still having impacts in our lives, but how were these impacts, to LGBTI, landless people, to indigenous people, to Black communities, to rural people in Brazil? Could you describe a bit this context?
Yes, Paula. First, we identify fascism. Which fascism are we talking about? First, it's a collective method to perversely destroy life, because it's not only life. If we think of what most seduced us in fascism, but also attacked us, was the forms of organizing. Fascism is not spontaneous. Fascism is organized by social cells that have to instate hate, but we cannot talk of fascism without talking about intersectionality. We have to talk about the people. Who are the people who suffer every day from this fascism in society. It is the Black people, the youth, gay people, women, and so on. First, I want to say that here in Brazil, it's a great victory to take Bolsonaro out. This, in fact, was not a president. It was a disgoverned. We had to take him out. For us, Lula's election is not the beginning of paradise, but Bolsonaro's defeat is the way out of hell. So it has great meaning to defeat Bolsonaro. For almost 6 years, we have been facing difficult struggles since since Dilma was impeached. We have been facing violent processes in our body and forms of existence. Because if our forms of existence are attacked, we're not going to exist. I say this because this has been institutionalized. They have tried to annihilate our lives via public policies, health policies, education. And all this fascism has been organizing to destroy us, to make us sick every day. It has been terrible. So for us, we see a great result in the fields, people of the forests and the waters. If we think of the number of deaths in these areas, people have been dying a lot. And here in MST, we have been counting 6 deaths based on fascism. Felipe, young and Black, committed suicide because he couldn't face these policies of annihilating our lives. We have another person from Pernambuco who was attacked in the neck and died after leaving a party. Suzy Severino, in the north of Brazil, in a settlement, he was killed with white weapons. And in the south, Lindolfo too, he was burned inside a car. So for us, this is the extremism of fascism, which is a new fascism, but with old practices and new discourses. They are only getting worse. And this is a form of updating our struggles.
Thanks very much, Kelvin, for describing this horrible scenario that took place in Brazil over the past 4 years. And we are all very hopeful that the situation will start to change now, although we know it's not yet the paradise. Now I'd like to invite Souad, who comes also from a very complex context, the region in the Middle East and the north of Africa, a region full of conflicts, of armed conflicts. And Souad, if you can turn on your camera, I'd like to invite you to describe a bit to us to what extent women and gender diverse people are more vulnerable in territories of ongoing armed conflicts.
Thank you, Paula. About women, I think that the vulnerability with respect, so vulnerability of women and queer people, this vulnerability is not specific to, it cannot be defined so easily. Maybe we should wonder what vulnerability factor we are focusing on, because vulnerability has a large number of aspects. For example, physical characteristics. And another aspect is social vulnerability, economic vulnerability, political vulnerability, cultural vulnerability, and this regardless of the situation of conflict or not. And this is linked to a human capital. It's linked to education, health, housing, socioeconomic factor, and distribution of tasks inside the home. So, and the social capital overall. So women and queer people in general are subject to the sexism of patriarchy, are victims of sexism of patriarchy. They are victims of discrimination at home, on work, at work, and in the community in general. So there are very severe vulnerability factors that impact them socially and economically. But if we add to this, if we add to this patriarchal situation, the vulnerability in a situation of armed conflicts, as it exists in our region, because we are a patriarchal society, a first-class patriarchal society, it's embedded in our religion as well, and add to this armed conflicts like we are witnessing in Palestine, in Yemen, this vulnerability is increased by the war. This creates and uses a systemic violence as a methodology. This is rooted in armed conflicts. And I want to focus on women who are mothers, who are symbols of cultural identity. And they are carrying future generations when whole people like the Palestinians is eradicated or in the, and those women are specifically victims. They are tortured, assassinated, jailed. They are forced into prostitution, forced into sexual exploitation. So vulnerability is, for this specific category of gender, vulnerability is increased by the armed conflict. And vulnerability, so cultural and socio-economic vulnerability is enhanced by the conflict. Specifically in the case of the Palestinian people, they are forced to disappear progressively. And I think vulnerability is here multiplied by 2 compared for the women in particular, and for queer people in a situation like Palestinian one. So armed conflict enhances vulnerability and risk of disappearance for women and queer people who are not even acknowledged in their own society.
Thanks very much, Souad, for these insights from the region. A very tough one as well. And now I would like to invite Nikar to share with us if there are any. So you described that you live in a women and lesbians led community farm in Taiwan. are there any particular external challenges, no, or discriminations that your farm community face due to your, your identities, no, sexual and gender identities in the Taiwanese context?
Okay, yes.
Sorry, can you put your camera on?
Yeah,
yeah, great.
Is it on? Okay, yeah, great. Okay, so for me, paying attention to intersectionality enables us to question the single axis analytical framework, which I think is still quite prevalent in anti-discrimination politics and social movements. By single axis framework, I'm referring to the tendency to treat race, class, gender, sexuality, age, or physical disability as mutually exclusive categories of experience. Such a framework tends to take the experiences of the privileged members of the group as representative of the whole, while marginalizing the experiences of those who are multiply disadvantaged. In contrast, I believe a focus on intersectionality takes into account the multidimensionality of people's experiences in their full situated complexity. So in my personal experience, I'm a member of the Landak Feminist Farm, a women's cooperative farm founded in 2012. A constitutional ruling in 2017 has prompted the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2019, making Taiwan the first Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage. As a consequence, many of our fellow lesbian farmers in the countryside have come out and got married with their partners with the blessings of villagers and senior family members. So this sounds like a very happy picture. However, while there is a hopeful prospect that queer farmers as individuals are gradually gaining acceptance and recognition in Taiwan, at the structural level, agricultural policies and realities in Taiwan are still dominated by capitalism and cis-hetero patriarchy. First of all, Taiwan's legal system defines farmers based on farmland ownership. And because the majority of my fellow farmers do not come from a farming family background, we are very less likely to have the good fortune to inherit a piece of farmland. Even for those who are from a farming family background, being a woman means that you have fewer chances than your brothers to inherit the family land. Moreover, as land speculation has driven the price of farmland in Taiwan to a record high, most of us cannot afford to buy a piece of land in our lifetime. Therefore, many of my fellow farming friends can only farm on leased land and hence without being recognized by the state as farmers. As a consequence, these new farmers are not eligible to apply for various kinds of subsidies and benefits given to farmers. So in this sense, their agricultural practices are based on very shaky grounds and are without the prospect of long-term stability. I'll end here.
Thank you a lot, Nikar, for bringing this Asian context to us, specifically in Taiwan. So now we are closing this first block of our session. I recall you that if you have questions, please put it in the chat that we can come back to it later on. Now we are moving to the second block, and here we want to talk about the relation between private and public. We often hear that issues of care, issues of love, of emotional relations, this is part of the private life of a person, and this has no place in the public life. However, we have an understanding that the private influence the public, and the other way around. So we want to speak now about this dialectic relation between private and public. And for that, I would like to start now with Kelvin, asking you, Kelvin, how come that your sexual orientation turned to be part of a political struggle for, for access to land, for food sovereignty, in your activism. Can you share with us some insights?
Sim, claro. Oh, yes, of course. First, we have to identify each people's history. We have to talk about history of Brazil. Brazil's colonized with a slavery process, and we have seen more than 500 years of slavery. We have ended the domination of Black people. This is a problem, and we have to identify this problem. Moreover, the problem of expelling people from the country. The indigenous people have been expelled from land, and also the Black people. So MST has started gradually talking about land reform. The LGBT collective that is organized within the landless movement. It did not exist, so it starts inspiring processes, and they say a lot of about this violence. We have always been inside the landless movement, but we have not been seen, we have not been able to expose of sexuality, because the rural area is very masculine, which is also connected to the capitalism, divided into three factories, three parts: man-centered, the division of work, and gender. So we start creating a political identity. We have been able to identify ourselves as individual bodies and LGBT bodies, marginalized within this society. We can assume this political identity. So first, who are the individual who constructed the movement? Can we talk of freedom of bodies without talking about freedom of land? It's impossible to talk about land without talking about the bodies who live in them. So it makes a lot more sense when we talk about land, body, and identity as elements that have to be all together, because our bodies is our territories. So we have to understand them in this process. And it goes through affect, how we relate, and this effect cannot be romanticized all the time. This affection has to be translated within the comrades. It has to be translated within the struggle.
Brilliant, Kelvin. Thanks. I think it was very, very clear how our bodies are part of the struggle and therefore need to be part of our political struggle. No. So Dee, could you now also, in the same line, describe to us how have the entrenched discriminatory systems affected your private life in food systems, and how have you also used your experience in the food movement?
Okay, so I am the legacy of dispossession, marginalization, and oppression, and I am landless in the belly of the beast. And I refer to England as the belly of the beast because England is the architect of capitalism, of racial capitalism, and a lot of the systems of oppressions that exist today. My ancestors were bought and sold, enslaved and trafficked to the Caribbean and South America, enslaved, and other ancestors were violently dispossessed of their land. And I carry that in my DNA. That has been scientifically proven. So I have those ancestral memories of violence and violation in my body. But I also carry memories of the struggle for liberty. And I have also experienced physical violence, sexual violence in my own lifetime. And I carry that trauma. I'm daughter of knowledge keepers, of ancestral foodways and spiritual practices. And those are dismissed, those are laughed at. You know, my abilities, my knowledge, my practice, my intellectual acumen. You know, I experience violence within our food system in terms of being able to farm. And farming is the whitest profession here in England and the developed nations. And I've used my own personal experiences as an actionist to develop projects and to advocate at a policy level to change things. And most recently, in the civil society and Indigenous peoples mechanism and the Women and Genders working group to advance policies on women and gender in terms of how that impacts on people's food security.
Thanks a lot, Dee, for your powerful, inputs here today, but also in the daily struggle. Very much appreciated. Now, Nikar, how do you experience this relation between private and public within your farm community?
Yes, Paula. Since coming into farming, I have always been very open about my sexual orientation. This is because Landdyke Farm was founded right in the middle of the marriage equality campaign in Taiwan. And most of the founding members of Landykes were involved in the LGBTQIA movement in Taiwan for a long time. We know since day one that we need to be out, being out there in the countryside to let people know that the LGBTQ movement in Taiwan should not be urban-centered only. And likewise, we also want to be out in order to tell our fellow farmer friends that queer people can also become farmers. We are worried about the tendency in the larger alternative farming movement in Taiwan to think of the family farm as the sacred unit of small-scale farming without questioning the cisgender, heterosexual, patriarchal assumptions that could come hand in hand in many of the family farming practices. To be clear, I'm not against family farming at all. I'm only suggesting that while we mobilize and campaign for the value of family farming as a way to counter the large-scale capitalist farming, we should not fall into the pitfall of the single-axis analytical framework of class. Instead, we should exercise the intersectional and analytical approach by questioning capitalist and heterosexual patriarchal dominations at the same time. I believe that we need to ask, how do we position ourselves in agriculture in ways beyond capital and heteronormative kinship ties? I believe it is important to come up with other possible ways to imagine, as well as institutionalize human and land connections, wherein inheritance and ownership are the only two among many options rather than the only exclusive options. I believe it's a question of rethinking and reorganizing in order to enrich the notion of family farms and to turn contemporary family farming into a more useful tool for rural social justice and sustainability. So with my fellow land dykes in the farm, we are trying to live our ideal of a more inclusive family farm into reality, and to create and to be in the world we wish to live in.
I don't know if I have the impression. Thank you, Nikar. You're done, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, because there was a little moment where you frozen, but I think we got everything. Now, thank you, Nikar. And now, Souad, you come from the World March of Women, which is one of maybe the biggest feminist movement worldwide, no? How the World March of Women transform the private stories of its members into collective political actions for systemic change.
Thank you, Paula. I want to say that the World Women March works for gender justice and against patriarchy through a transversal feminist perspective. For example, we want to show violence, make it visible. We want to make violations and violences, all of them, visible. And we want to show that there are differences at the root of society. We want to show that in the patriarchal system, there are several layers of violations: colonialism, racism, patriarchy, elitism, capitalism, Eurocentrism, and as well several other layers. We want also to observe power and understand that behind every conflict there are power dynamics. The patriarchal system is exerting power in an unfair way for women. نحن عبر كفاحاتنا أو نزاعاتنا بالعمل، النساء هي رائدات بكفاحاتنا ضد الحروب، السياسة النيوليبرالية، عنف الشرطة، العنصرية، الإبادة الجماعية. النساء تدافعون من أجل الاستقلالية، وهم في الواجهة بالكفاحات بالمناطق Sorry.
Onsi, make sure you're in the English channel.
Yes. Yes, sorry. I switched without realizing.
Okay, Paula, it should be fixed now.
I just want to say that the list of struggles is longer than this. There's a resistance and a strengthening, a collective strengthening. Women are as well in all the food structure and in the agroecologic production, in social and solidarity economy, in solidarity activism, in collective cooking, in the coaching of collectives, in the socialization of healthcare, and in producing communication against the hegemony and the grabbing or the regrabbing of cultural health practices. There are each specific story is different in each region of the world, And that is a great strength for the World Women's March. Okay, I just want to conclude saying that our challenge is to build a perspective of diversity for resisting the present model. We want to build a system against injustice and exploitation, and we want to build a model that puts the sustainability of life at the center.
Thanks a lot, Souad. Thanks to all of you for showing how important and how powerful, no, the private stories are for our collective joint struggle. No, they are the roots, no, of our struggle. So now again, we are moving to the third block, in which we are going to speak about organizing, the power, the transformational power of organizing. And now I would like to start with Nikar. Nikar, what is the power of the Lendijk family farm? And what have been your achievements since 2012 when you were set?
Okay, thanks, Paula. For me personally, Lendijk has become an integral part of my life. I am a researcher, a farmer, and an educator, and Lendijk has been a resource of inspiration and brings many synergy into my work and life. And for the community, the goal of Lendijk Farm is to create a non-binary, gender-friendly CS farm, serving as a launching point, providing women with skills and strength to become farmers. Right now, we have 6 members, 3 rice farmers, 2 fruit farmers, and 1 vegetable farmer. And we have accompanied many other women to come into the field of farming. I cannot say that we have achieved a lot farming-wise. We are still trying to strike a good balance, better balance between our input and output. And I believe each year we have progressed a little. But over the past 10 years in general, I can say with confidence that we have successfully increased visibility and respect for women and queer farmers in Taiwan. Each year, we hear from women and especially young queer people who are aspiring to become farmers. They come to reach us and come visit us and do a very short intern with us. We cannot teach them how to become rich and successful farmers right away, but we can share with them with honesty where we have succeeded and perhaps more importantly, where and how we have failed, so that these young people do not repeat our mistakes. We're happy to see that they can take us as their stepping stones. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikar. Great achievements, and inspiration for many other communities in other territories. Now, Kelvin, would you share with us how has the MST and Via Campesina Brazil been organizing to enhance the visibility and also to protect the lives of LGBTI people in rural areas? Earlier you have already mentioned the series of attacks and also killings that you've suffered as movement, as rural communities in Brazil. So how have you been organizing to overcome this situation?
So, okay, first, we have to start talking about the experiences. We have a first experience, a virtual experience in the pandemics. Via Campesina Brazil has organized a seminar that is flourishing and blooming and giving us our living. And this 2022, we have made the second seminar in local with lots of LGBT people and also from 6 countries from South America. People from organizations here in Brazil to share their knowledge and managing strategies to manage these attacks in the field. First, in the seminars, we have started a permanent campaign against this LGBT phobia. In fact, it's going to be launched this year. It's been systemized. It's been still introduced into the organizations so that in May this year, we can, on the 17th of May, we can launch a permanent campaign against the violences to LGBT bodies. And this is not just a speaking campaign, because it has a methodology that makes all our militants, LGBT or not, be in charge permanently in the campaign. It's going to have some material, audiovisual material. It's going to be some papers in the settlements, to the territories, to the farm schools, to the cooperatives, so that these spaces become places to strengthen these movements. And since the beginning of the pandemics, we have created a network to combat this violence, but it is not limited to domestic violence. It gives some psychological treatment. It has treated more than 1,000 people, LGBT people, women, Black people. All our militants are becoming sick because we have been every day facing all these violences. So we're having this campaign to organize ourselves.
Thanks a lot, Kelvin, and wishing you a great campaign over the year. Now, Dee, we just heard from an example, experience in Brazil, how they are organizing. You are organized in the UK, in England and Devoted Nations. So could you tell us more about the work of the Land Workers Alliance with the member identity groups like Out on the Land, Rio, and other emerging groups there?
Okay, so part of our work at Land Workers Alliance is to support members, and we have sectoral groups, but we also have member identity groups. So Out on Land supports queer and gender diverse people. Real, which stands for Racial Equity, Abolition and Liberation, supports racially marginalized and sort of minoritized farmers and land workers. And our goal within that group is to advance racial justice within our food system. So that becomes part of our wider work. We also work in partnership with other organizations like Lion, Land in Our Names, which is a Black-led land justice collective with a reparations model, and with Farmerama. And what has come out of those partnerships is cultivating justice, which with UTOL, at UTOL, which is Out on the Land, which was a series of zines and podcasts to amplify our voices and increase visibility, but also to celebrate our existence. We have our Land Skills Fair, which brings together a diversity of people and provide spaces for discussions, for supports. And we've also had a series of growers retreats with a grower and author, Claire Rattinon, who's the author of Unearthed, and I think her session is happening right now as well. And that is part of our land justice work in Gloucestershire. And we supported the Jumping Fences research, which looks at barriers to farming and land work for racially minoritized farmers and growers here and other land workers. And that report was launched yesterday and is available at the website of Lion. But yeah, we have other groups emerging. So there's a women and gender diverse people working group of people working in forestry, because UTL somehow didn't really represent their interests. So our work is moving beyond diversity, inclusion to participation and equity and justice.
Great, Dee. We are here in Europe. We are also very, very inspired about the work that you guys have been doing with the Land Workers Alliance. Thanks very much for all the energy and commitment that you put in this struggle. Now, Souad, after hearing from local experience in Taiwan, hearing from a territorial experience in the Land Workers Alliance in Via Campesina, Brazil, now I would like to hear from you. At international level, there is an ongoing process for gender equality in the Committee of World Food Security. Could you tell us how you have been organizing in the civil society, indigenous peoples mechanism for the Committee on World Food Security? What are the demands of civil society, indigenous peoples in that space, and which are the challenges that you have encountered? And maybe also, what have you already been able to change during this negotiation process?
Thank you, Paula. So the civil society mechanism for indigenous people at the FAO allowed us to negotiate on a process for equality. Well, and this was a document. This is a document that will be published at the international level, and we wanted to be aligned to the international standards related to equality and gender. We are working a lot at the local level for this in relation to key issues, not only related to nutrition, but also at other levels, the availability of raw material for food that is diminished by wars. We also want international documents to help us for our demands related to quality food. There is an international movement that can strengthen our movement and our demands. For example, when we use agroecology in our farming system, we can do it within a reference frame that is more or less international. And therefore, in relation to discriminations related to gender, the international framework is strengthening our struggle and our solidarity, because those discriminations are rooted in our patriarchal society, in conservative society. Also, through our food systems, we want it to be managed. We want it to be made visible for women who are in occupied territories. Women who are in occupied territories are have their food systems that are impacted by those conflicts. Also, in relation to the female farming workers, they need social security. It is very important that they get social protection, so that we, at the international level, fight for universal social protection. We have gigantic difficulties. Paula knows it very well. We were very well organized. We came back to the base, and we tried to see how we could use the international results or achievements at our local level. Unfortunately, there was a lot of obstacles to overcome, and that are still to overcome, because they are rooted. They are rooted in the political international issues. So we want some capital that allows us to fight. For all the people who are experiencing an unfair food system, and in particular in the weak countries, people are victims of capitalism, and they are not autonomous in their food systems. They are sometimes starving because the food system is not going well, and the system in its globality is actually not going well. We are not able to defend this alone, but in our communities and all together with the whole population, we have to fight with all people who are for a fair food system. We need equality, and this is how we can struggle, and this is how we will win, I am sure.
Thanks a lot, Souad. Yes, we are going to win. And now I hope the audience is enjoying this session. Now it's the time for for us to come together and to have a more interactive part. For that, you have to move here to the Zoom room where we are already and waiting for you. I believe the link to the Zoom is pasted in the chat of Crowdcast. And thanks for being with us. We are waiting for you here. In 2 minutes, we are starting with the Q&A and dialogue part.